In 2012, Tate Modern held a year-long virtual exhibition named The Gallery of Lost Art. As the title implies, it consisted of artworks which had been either lost, stolen, or broken beyond repair. Among these works were Construction in Space by Naum Gabo. Gabo, of course a constructivist, was drawn to the new emerging materials of the 20th century, and one of these materials was cellulose acetate. Unbeknownst to Gabo at the time, cellulose acetate is a highly biodegradable material. In fact, just 30 years after the work's completion in 1936, it started to show signs of degradation. Initially blaming what he thought was poor storage conditions, Gabo reluctantly made a replica, which is now at the Tate, and which is also slowly deteriorating. This video will, as usual, be about the construction process of this chronograph stack. Yet there is something about Gabo and his experiments with new materials that resonates with me. Part of the fun and frustration of being self-taught is the gradual discovery of past mistakes that come back to haunt you, and while it does bring haste to the development of new profanities to utilize as you endure the slow undoing of your own past brilliance, it can make you question just about every decision you make, from choice of materials to electrical engineering solutions. Construction in Space was not the first nor the last time Gabo would make replicas of his own work. Although he spent most of his life denying that his choice of materials caused the frequent degradation of his pieces, he also often produced variations of the same work using entirely different materials and sometimes made by entirely different people. As a result, even posthumous replicas could arguably be considered a continuation of his own practice of improving and upgrading his works as new materials emerged. Gabo's constructivism was, after all, reflective of the developments in industrial technology. Although the 1960s recreation of Construction in Space was made using the same biodegradable material as the original, ostensibly to prove that the material was in fact not responsible for the work's degradation, he did eventually begin using the newly invented plexiglass from the late 1930s. While I don't intend for this video to delve into the ethical considerations of replicas, an interesting point is made in a statement from the copyright holders of Gabo's work, which essentially states that any artificial aging employed in prospective replicas should be avoided, as the material's aging trajectory will diverge from that of the original. Presumably it refers to processes such as patination of metals or the yellowing of plastics, but what stands out is that they appear to regard the senescence of the work as intrinsic to its artistic value, as a parallel, almost performative dimension of the piece. As such, deterioration is not framed solely as a process of loss, but as an expression of the artwork's ephemerality, where impermanence is not a defect, but an attribute. The drawings of Lebbeus Woods, the architectural theorist, consistently appear situated in a future where the material degradation of his buildings has already progressed to an advanced stage, indicating a very different point of departure in the aesthetic principles of his architectural practice. While most architects undoubtedly regard their newly realized buildings as the primary and best representation of their ideas, Woods seemingly bypasses this convention by depicting the building at the terminus of its lifespan and using it as the conceptual basis of his architectural vision. It's perhaps not surprising, considering much of Woods' work focuses on indeterminate architecture, structures conceived to transform and adapt to their occupants, existing as dynamic frameworks rather than static objects, and allowing for continuous evolution and reinterpretation. A physical example that embodies this approach is Antoni Gaudi's Sagrada Familia, which during its 140 years of continuous construction has been shaped by societal changes and advancements in engineering and technology. Ironically, it almost feels as if its projected completion in 2026 marks the end of its life cycle as an adaptive, indeterminate structure, finally cementing it in a state where further evolution is no longer possible. Let us for a brief moment take stock of the materials used in this project, the one you're currently watching. We have 3D printed plastics, specifically PETG and wood-filled PLA, alongside acrylic glass, anodized aluminium, and whatever the various electronic components are made out of. When it comes to 3D printed parts, the immediate threat is not the direct biodegradation of the material itself. In fact, studies have shown that even PLA, which is widely and somewhat misleadingly considered a biodegradable material, will not decompose unless exposed to specific industrial conditions. The more pressing factors affecting long-term stability include ultraviolet exposure, mechanical relaxation or creep under load, and heat and moisture, which all in one way or another may deform the material rather than outright decompose it. And I've got to admit, I'm a little bit nervous about the moisture absorption properties of wood-filled PLA. The obvious solution is, of course, to simply avoid using PLA, which I do, unless it's this specific wood-filled PLA that I keep using due to its distinct visual and tactile quality. So, is it worth sacrificing material longevity in return for a perceived aesthetic gain, or the bigger question, how long is an artwork expected to last? In the case of Gabo and construction in space, 30 years was apparently already considered too short for the Philadelphia Museum of Art, who were the custodians of the piece at the time. So this has been a really long intro, and we are about to get into what this video was supposed to be about, namely the construction process of this recent project. I just wanted to make a point out of the fact that you don't always know how long something is going to last. In the case of Damien Hirst and the physical impossibility of death in the mind of someone living, he had to replace an entire shark as it gradually decayed from the inside out. He actually offers to replace these animals after 10 or so years, like a subscription service, I suppose, and you can think of that as you want. But it turns it into a sort of performative aspect, which lets you experience the decay in real time, and I think there is something nice about that. As is so often the case, this project started out as one thing and ended up as something entirely different. Before settling on the design shown in this video, I had completed a fully functional 3D model based on a very different design, basically ready for fabrication. It was heavily inspired by an earlier work of mine called Bore and Quaver, and the similarity between the two was what prompted me to look into the ethics of replicas and the kind of material evolution seen in Hurst and Gabo's reworkings of their own sculptures in the first place. In commission projects, clients often refer to earlier works, identifying elements they wish to see incorporated into their newly purchased piece. In this case, the vertical orientation, sound, and overall satellite-esque design of Bohr and Quaver were chosen as some of the more compelling elements to reuse. Unsurprisingly, my initial 3D model adopted a similar structure, revolving around a central speaker enclosure held up by something resembling lunar module landing gear, with secondary elements extending outwards from there. But despite its deviations and the fact that it wasn't an exact replica, it still remained a bit too close to the original for my liking. I do have an aversion to reproducing previous works, partially due to the sheer monotony of repetition, but more importantly because it feels unfair to those who own the originals. With that in mind, the initial design was scrapped and replaced with the one you are about to become acquainted with. Before we continue, I just wanted to say thank you to PCBWay, who partially sponsored this project by sending me the aluminium parts free of charge. They also helped me out last year when I made what is probably one of my more ambitious projects to date, namely Shutter Sequence, which revolved around the concept of a radial engine. In that project, I took a particular liking to the anodized aluminium finish, so it felt a natural choice to use in this project as well. As expected, everything is completely up to the required specification and tolerances, so again, massive thanks to PCBWay for helping me out for the second time, and I highly recommend their services. So, this chronograph stack is a 15-volt, 2.4 amp sound and light sculpture divided into two sections, sandwiched by 3 aluminium plates. A lot of care was taken to make sure that all the hardware would stay locked in their positions by using spring washers and torque-retaining nylock nuts wherever possible. I always enjoy a bit of overkill in these situations, but the real and more practical reason is that not all of the fasteners will be easily accessible once all the components are in place, and I don't expect anyone to routinely service these devices after completion. The only thing I do expect anyone to routinely service is the user interface, which consists of a power connector, an on-off switch, volume knob, and a stereo line output. The audio, produced by the Daisy Seed microcontroller, is programmed so that the various synthesizer voices pan randomly across the stereo field. Since the sculpture contains only a single loudspeaker, which obviously cannot reproduce stereophonic sound, the complete spatial effect is accessible only through the line output, and the speaker receives a mono mix of the microcontroller's 2 output channels. The algorithmic composition can be divided into 2 parts: a harmonic backdrop of 4 chord-producing sawtooth oscillators, and a higher, more sporadic square wave oscillator. Although a master clock runs continuously in the background, its function is more suggestive than prescriptive, providing a loose temporal framework rather than acting as a metronome. To understand how the 4 voices behave, it helps to think of them as strings on a guitar that are being strummed unevenly, with short random time intervals between each string. The pitches forming each chord are determined by several factors, namely the chosen scale, the notes preloaded into the sequencer, and a set of randomized interval selections that collectively shape the chord across the 4 voices. While the first note follows the sequencer directly, the remaining 3 voices are assigned intervals that typically form a triad, extended with a 9th or 11th for color and voice leading. Any of these notes could randomly be placed an octave or 2 below the rest of the chord, giving a loose sense of a harmonic root. As an example, the following soundtrack showcases all the possible chord permutations when the scale is a C Ionian and the starting note is an A, effectively making it a minor scale. course, this example excludes the sequencer, so there's no real-world possibility of this exact chord progression ever happening while the sequencer continuously changes the starting note of the strummed chord. In addition to Ionian, the gamut of scales include harmonic minor, as well as an asymmetric octatonic scale loosely based on the modes used by the French composer Olivier Messiaen. When choosing scales, I typically listen to music with distinctive harmonic soundscapes and try to emulate their specific qualities, as I previously did with Boring Quaver and Jan Boerman. There is also a kinetic element in this sculpture. While the algorithm is using a sort of temporal indeterminacy system to organize its 4 main chord-producing voices, a rotary to linear mechanism controls the timing of the higher independent accent voice. This mechanism is in itself controlled by the same temporal allocation process that determines the entry of the 4 main voices, but exists independently on account of the carriage's position along its axis. Fixed along this axis is a housing for the light-dependent resistor, which detects light from the blue LED mounted on the carriage. This LDR forms the upper half of a voltage divider, which is compared to a threshold voltage set by a potentiometer at the back of the sculpture. As a result, each time the carriage passes the LDR housing, the resulting signal triggers the auxiliary accent voice, linking its sound directly to the motion of the mechanism. As for the light design, in addition to the LED on the linear carriage, the sculpture features 2 sets of light pipes, along with 4 floodlight resembling white LEDs in a fixture suspended just below the canopy. These, in one way or another, behave in accordance with the amplitude of the music, either reflecting the overall volume of the musical elements combined, or by tracking a selected subset. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. Approximately 96% of the music has been produced by the sculpture without alterations, where 3 of the 4 remaining percent is from another sculpture altogether, and 1% is a single crossfade between 2 chords in the very first showcase of the work at the beginning of the video. The code and schematics have already been uploaded to my Patreon page, so if you are interested in that, you can find a link in the description. Otherwise, thank you for your time, and I hope to see you in another video.